Melania Trump sacrifices her life to save Barron Trump from shooter. It was a beautiful evening, the kind of night that seemed almost too perfect. The sky was painted in shades of deep purple and soft orange as the sun set behind the city skyline. Inside the grand ballroom of the New York Heritage Hotel, the annual charity gala was in full swing. Laughter and conversation filled the air as elegantly dressed guests mingled under the glittering chandeliers. Melania Trump stood near the center of the room, her presence commanding yet warm. Dressed in a midnight blue gown, she looked every bit the former First Lady, graceful, composed, and effortlessly radiant. Barron stood by her side, dressed in a sharp black suit and tie. At 16, he had grown tall and confident, but tonight, a shadow of unease lingered in his eyes. "Are you all right, Barron?" Melania asked, her voice soft but full of concern. "You've been quiet." Barron hesitated, glancing around the room. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, though his tone didn't quite match his words. "Just something feels off. I don't know why." Melania placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "It's just a busy night. Sometimes large crowds can be overwhelming." He nodded, trying to shake the strange feeling in his chest. He told himself it was nothing. They were at a charity gala, surrounded by diplomats, celebrities, and prominent figures from around the world. Security was tight. There was no reason to worry. Still, Barron couldn't ignore the nagging sensation that something was wrong. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on a man standing near the entrance. The man wore a plain black suit, blending in with the other guests, but something about him seemed out of place. His posture was too rigid, his eyes too focused. "Mom," Barron began, his voice trailing off. Melania followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly. She gave a subtle nod to one of the Secret Service agents stationed nearby. The agent moved discreetly toward the man, blending into the crowd as he approached. "It's probably nothing," Melania said, her voice calm. "But it's always good to be cautious." Barron nodded, feeling a little more at ease. His mother's steady presence had always been his anchor. No matter what chaos swirled around them, Melania never lost her composure. It was something Barron admired deeply about her. The program began, and the crowd moved toward the stage as the gala's host took the microphone. Speeches were made, donations announced, and applause echoed through the ballroom. For a while, the uneasy feeling faded, replaced by the hum of the event. But then it happened. A sudden commotion near the back of the room sent a ripple of panic through the crowd. People turned, craning their necks to see what was happening. The man Barron had noticed earlier was no longer standing near the entrance. He had moved closer to the stage, his hand reaching into his jacket. Time seemed to slow as Barron's eyes locked onto the metallic glint in the man's hand. A gun. "Get down," someone shouted. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed and ducked for cover as the gunman raised the weapon, his eyes focused on the stage. Barron stood frozen in place, his body refusing to move despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Barron," Melania's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. "Get down." But before he could react, the gunman's finger tightened on the trigger. The sound of the shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. In that split second, Melania made a choice that would change everything. Without hesitation, she threw herself in front of Barron, her body shielding him from the bullet. The impact sent her crashing to the floor, her midnight blue gown pooling around her like a sea of shadows. "Mom." Barron's voice cracked as he dropped to his knees beside her. His hands trembled as he pressed them against the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. "No, no, no, stay with me." Melania's eyes fluttered open, her breath shallow but steady. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Okay," she whispered, a faint smile touching her lips. "Don't talk," Barron said, his voice breaking. "Help is coming." The Secret Service agents had already subdued the shooter, pinning him to the ground as sirens wailed in the distance. Medics rushed into the ballroom, their voices calm but urgent as they assessed the situation. "We need to move her now," one of the medics said, placing an oxygen mask over Melania's face. "Stay with us, ma'am." Barron refused to let go of her hand as they lifted her onto a stretcher. "I'm coming with you," he said, his voice firm despite the tears streaming down his face. The medics nodded, and within moments, they were racing toward the waiting ambulance. Barron sat beside his mother, gripping her hand tightly as the vehicle sped through the city streets, its siren cutting through the night. "You're going to be okay," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You have to be." The ambulance tore through the streets, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Inside, everything felt unreal. Barron sat beside his mother, his heart hammering in his chest, each passing second stretching into eternity. Melania lay on the stretcher, her face pale but peaceful, her eyes closed. The oxygen mask covered her mouth, and her breaths were shallow and labored. "Stay with me, Mom," Barron whispered, his voice trembling. "Please don't leave me." The paramedic glanced at him, her expression a mixture of sympathy and focus. "She's holding on," she said gently. "We're almost there." The ambulance swerved into the hospital entrance, where a team of doctors and nurses was already waiting. As soon as the doors swung open, they sprang into action, wheeling Melania into the emergency room. Barron tried to follow, but a nurse gently held him back. "You can't go in there," she said softly. "They need space to work." "I need to be with her," Barron insisted, his voice breaking. "I know," the nurse said, her eyes kind but firm. "But the best thing you can do right now is wait. We'll come get you as soon as we know more." Barron stood frozen for a moment, his breath hitching in his chest. He hated feeling helpless. He hated not being able to do anything. But he nodded slowly and let the nurse guide him to the waiting area. The waiting room was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the white walls. Barron paced back and forth, his mind racing. His thoughts were a blur of memories. Her laughter, her comforting words, the way she always seemed to know exactly what to say when he was struggling. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he tried to focus. He sent a quick message to his father, "Mom's been hurt. We're at the hospital. Please come." The minutes dragged on like hours. Every time a doctor walked by, Barron's heart leapt into his throat, only to sink again when they passed without stopping. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a surgeon in scrubs approached him. Her face was serious but calm. "Are you Barron Trump?" she asked. "Yes," Barron said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How is she? Is she okay?" "She's stable for now," the surgeon said, her voice steady and measured. "The bullet missed any major organs, but there was significant blood loss. We were able to stop the bleeding and repair the damage, but the next 24 hours will be critical. She's in recovery now." Relief flooded through Barron's body, and his knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "You can see her soon," the surgeon added. "But she'll need plenty of rest. Right now, it's important for her to stay calm and avoid stress." Barron nodded, wiping his eyes. "I just want to be with her." The surgeon gave him a reassuring smile. "Follow me." Melania's hospital room was quiet, the steady beep of the heart monitor the only sound. She lay in the bed, her face pale but peaceful, and 4 drip attached to her arm. Barron stood in the doorway for a moment, his chest tightening at the sight of her. He had never seen her look so fragile. He walked to her bedside and gently took her hand. "Mom," he whispered. "It's me. I'm here." Her eyelids fluttered open, and her lips curved into a faint smile. "Barron," she said softly, her voice barely audible. Tears welled up in Barron's eyes. "You scared me," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I was going to lose you." Melania squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her eyes filled with love and reassurance. "You too important." Barron swallowed hard, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "You saved my life," he said. "You didn't even think twice. You just jumped in front of me." "I would do it again," Melania whispered. 1,000 times. Barron lowered his head, his tears falling freely now. "I don't know what I would have done if something happened to you." "You're stronger than you realize," Melania said, her eyes locking onto his. "You would have found your way. But I'm glad. I'm still here with you." For a long time, they sat in silence, their hands clasped tightly together. Barron didn't care about the world outside that hospital room. All that mattered was that his mom was alive, and she was still fighting. As the hours passed, the news of the shooting spread like wildfire. Major news outlets covered the story relentlessly, with headlines that sent shockwaves across the country. Melania Trump heroically saves son in harrowing attack. Tragedy averted. Former First Lady sacrifices herself to protect Barron Trump. Shooter apprehended at New York gala. Motives under investigation. The public reaction was overwhelming. Social media exploded with messages of support and prayers for Melania's recovery. Friends and family flooded Barron's phone with calls and texts, offering anything they could do to help. For the first time in his life, Barron didn't care about the media attention. He stayed by his mother's side, refusing to leave her room even for a moment. Every time she stirred or murmured his name, a wave of relief washed over him. Days later, Melania's condition improved enough for her to sit up and speak more easily. Barron brought her a bouquet of white roses and placed them on the table by her bed. "Do you remember these?" he asked with a small smile. Melania's eyes lit up. "The garden," she said. "From the White House." Barron nodded. "You always said they were your favorite." "They still are," Melania said, her voice stronger now. "Thank you, Barron." Barron pulled a chair closer to her bed, his expression turning serious. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. About what happened, and about everything you've done for me. I've always known you were strong, but you're the bravest person I know." Melania smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And you are the kindest. You've grown into a man I'm so proud of, Barron. You've always had a strong heart." They sat together, their bond stronger than ever, the weight of the past few days slowly lifting. The days that followed felt like a blur. The hospital became a second home for Barron as he refused to leave his mother's side. Nurses and doctors grew accustomed to seeing him sitting by her bed, always alert, always ready to help in any way he could. Every moment Melania grew stronger was like a weight lifting off his chest. Still, the trauma of the incident lingered in the back of Barron's mind. No matter how hard he tried to focus on his mother's recovery, flashes of that moment, the sound of the gunshot, the sight of his mother collapsing, kept haunting him. He sat in the hospital room late one evening, staring at the soft glow of the heart monitor as it beeped steadily. Melania had fallen asleep again, her breathing calm and even. Barron leaned back in his chair, exhausted but unable to close his eyes. The door opened quietly, and Chief Reynolds stepped inside, his face serious but kind. "Barron," he said, his voice low. "Do you have a moment?" Barron nodded and stood, glancing back at his mother before following the chief into the hallway. "We've got an update on the investigation," Chief Reynolds began. "The man who attacked your mom, his motives are becoming clearer." Barron crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "Why did he do it?" Chief Reynolds exhaled slowly. "It looks like he was motivated by political anger. He had a history of extremist views and believed targeting high-profile figures like your family would send a message. Fortunately, our team intervened before it got worse." Barron's stomach churned. It was hard to wrap his head around the fact that someone had tried to hurt his family just because of who they were. "Is he in custody?" Barron asked. "Yes," the chief assured him. "He's being charged with multiple offenses. He won't be able to harm anyone else." Barron nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and lingering unease settling over him. "Thank you, Chief. If you ever need someone to talk to about all this," Chief Reynolds said, placing a hand on Barron's shoulder, "don't hesitate to reach out. What you've been through, it's a lot for anyone, especially someone your age." Barron managed a small smile. "I will. Thanks again." The next morning, Melania woke to find Barron sitting by her bedside, his eyes tired but determined. She could sense the heaviness in the air, the weight of everything they had been through pressing down on them. "Barron," she said softly. "Come here." He leaned closer, and she cupped his face with her hand, her touch warm and comforting. "You've been so strong," Melania said. "But you don't have to carry all this on your own." "I'm okay," Barron said, though his voice cracked slightly. I keep thinking about what could have happened. If I hadn't noticed that guy, if you hadn't?" Melania shook her head. "What matters is that we're both here. We can't live in the what-ifs. We can only move forward, stronger than before." Barron swallowed hard, blinking back tears. You almost died because of me? No, Melania said firmly. I lived because of you. You gave me something to fight for. And you always will. For the first time in days, Barron let himself break down. He rested his head on her shoulder, and Melania wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. In that moment, the fear and pain melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of love and gratitude. As Melania's condition improved, visitors began to arrive. Friends, family, and even former colleagues from her time in the White House came to offer their support. The hospital room was filled with flowers, cards, and well wishes from people around the world. One afternoon, a knock on the door interrupted their quiet moment. A nurse stepped inside, holding a large bouquet of white roses, Melania's favorite. These just arrived, the nurse said with a smile, placing the flowers on the table. Barron leaned forward, pulling out the attached note. His eyes widened as he read it. To Melania, the bravest woman I've ever known. The world is better because of your courage. Get well soon. Michelle Obama. Melania chuckled softly, her eyes lighting up. That's very kind of her. Barron smiled, placing the note back on the table. You've always had a way of bringing people together. It's not about politics, Melania said thoughtfully. It's about humanity. We all have the same goal, keeping our loved ones safe. Weeks later, Melania was finally discharged from the hospital. The doctors insisted she take it easy for a while, but being home again felt like a victory in itself. Barron hovered close, always ready to help, though Melania often teased him for being overly cautious. I'm not made of glass, you know, she said one afternoon as Barron helped her into a chair on the balcony. I know, Barron said with a grin. But you've been through a lot. Let me take care of you for a change. Melania laughed, a sound that felt like sunshine after a storm. All right, Mr. Protective. I'll allow it. As life gradually returned to normal, Barron found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. He had learned more about strength, courage, and resilience in those few weeks than he ever thought possible. But most importantly, he had learned the true meaning of family, the unbreakable bond that held them together, even in the darkest moments. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching the sunset, Barron turned to his mom. Thank you, he said quietly. Melania raised an eyebrow. For what? For everything, Barron said. For protecting me, for teaching me how to be strong, for always being there. Melania reached over and squeezed his hand. That's what family does, she said softly. We protect each other. Always. Barron nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they could face them together. And in that moment, he realized something important. It wasn't the fear or the danger that defined them. It was the love and strength they found in each other. In the weeks that followed Melania's return home, life gradually returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such a harrowing event. Reporters eventually moved on to the next big story, and the media frenzy began to fade. But for Barron and Melania, the scars of that night remained, both visible and invisible. Melania was determined to heal, not just physically but emotionally. She took the doctor's advice seriously, resting when needed and avoiding stressful situations. But she was also stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and little by little she returned to her routines. Barron, however, found it harder to move on. The nightmares came often, vivid and relentless. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his mind replaying the moment the gun was fired and his mother fell. One night, after a particularly vivid dream, he couldn't take it anymore. He slipped out of his room and found Melania sitting in the living room, a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up as he approached, her eyes warm with concern. Can't sleep, she asked. Barron shook his head, sitting beside her on the couch. It's the nightmares, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I keep seeing it happen over and over. I try to forget, but it won't go away. Melania set her cup down and pulled him into a hug. It's okay to be scared, she said gently. What happened was traumatic. It's not something you can just forget overnight. I just feel powerless, Barron confessed. Like no matter what I do, I can't protect the people I care about. Melania pulled back and looked him in the eye. You've never been powerless, Barron. You were brave that night. You noticed something was wrong and trusted your instincts. That's what saved us both. And just because you can't control everything doesn't mean you're weak. True strength comes from knowing your limits and finding a way to move forward anyway. Barron nodded slowly, her words sinking in. He felt a small weight lift off his chest, not entirely gone, but lighter somehow. Thanks, Mum. Anytime, Melania said with a smile. You're not alone. We'll get through this together. A few days later, Barron found himself standing in front of the mirror, straightening his tie. Today was an important day, one that marked a turning point not just for him, but for his family. He was attending a youth leadership event organized by Chief Reynolds, who had personally invited him to speak. The event was meant to inspire young people to take action in their communities, to stand up for what was right and help others. Barron wasn't sure what to expect. Public speaking wasn't something he loved, but after everything he had experienced, he felt like he had something important to say. Melania, still recovering but determined to be there, gave him an encouraging nod as they arrived at the event. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and community leaders. Barron took a deep breath as he stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. I'm Barron Trump, and I'm here to talk about something I've learned the hard way, what it means to be strong. The room grew silent as the audience leaned in, hanging on his every word. Strength isn't about being invincible, Barron continued. It's not about never being afraid or never failing. True strength is about standing up even when you're scared. It's about protecting the people you care about, no matter the cost. He paused, glancing at his mom in the front row. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with pride. Not long ago, my mom made a choice that saved my life, Barron said, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't hesitate for a second. She put herself in harm's way because that's what love does. It protects, no matter the risk. The audience listened in rapt silence, some wiping away tears as Barron spoke. I've learned that we all have the power to be strong, not by pretending we're fearless, but by choosing to act even when it's hard, by standing up for others, by believing in something bigger than ourselves. The crowd erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Barron stood there for a moment, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. It wasn't just about the speech, it was about the journey that had brought him here. As they left the event, Barron and Melania walked quietly through the park, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the trees. For the first time in a long while, everything felt peaceful. You were amazing, Melania said, her hand resting on his shoulder. I'm so proud of you. Barron smiled, the weight of everything they had endured feeling lighter than ever. I couldn't have done it without you, he said. Melania stopped and turned to him, her expression serious but full of love. No, Barron, you did this on your own. You've grown into a man with a kind heart and a brave spirit. You've faced more than most people your age ever will, and you've come out stronger. Barron felt a lump rise in his throat. We're stronger, he corrected her. Melania nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Together, they stood there for a while, the world around them fading away as they embraced. It was a moment of healing, a promise that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together, stronger, braver, and more united than ever. Weeks later, Barron sat at his desk, scrolling through an email. It was from one of the students who had attended the youth leadership event. Hi Barron, I just wanted to say thank you. Your speech really inspired me. I've been scared to speak up for myself and others for a long time, but hearing your story gave me the courage to try. I volunteered at my local shelter last weekend, and it felt amazing to help. Thank you for being so brave. Barron smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more difficult moments. But now, Barron knew he had the strength to face them. And no matter what happened, he would never forget the lesson his mother had taught him, the power of love, courage, and family. Because in the end, that's what made them truly unbreakable.